Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Something I haven't done for a while today, a watch review. Doing a watch review of my newest watch, the Breitling SuperOcean 2 Ironman Limited Edition. The reference number for this is enormous, so I'm just going to put it above my head right now. In terms of shape and style, it's a hardcore diver. In terms of market, either low end of mid-level Swiss or the very highest end of entry-level Swiss. It's going to cost you about $3,000 practically speaking. So I'll let you decide where you think that falls. Year 2019, it came out this year. It's a limited edition. There was only 300 made. I believe they're all sold. So this review is largely, though, could be applied to any variant of the Breitling SuperOcean, particularly in the 44mm. So ignore the Ironman specific stuff and let's just focus on the overall package. Okay, so let's get into this. Let's talk about what's under the hood and what she'll do. So under the hood, there's a Breitling B17 movement. So what is that? That begins life as an ETA 2824-2. I have no idea what grade it is. From what I understand, you end up with upgraded materials inside there with a New Balance spring, new mainspring, new balance wheel, new escapement, some fine micrometer regulator assembly, and some new shock deflectors. All in all, it's a very accurate, very reliable, thoroughly modern movement, COSC certified, so you're going to get -4 to +6 seconds a day. Overall, that's excellent. In terms of functions, time, no date. In terms of power reserve, it's this fairly standard 42 hours that you get out of all of these ETA and Solita variants. That's probably now becoming kind of on the low end of what you'd expect. The Tudor movements are kind of making 70 plus hours the de rigueur and what you'd expect in this marketplace. And Breitling has access to that movement, which they label their B20 movement. And so it's curious, you might be curious about why this watch doesn't come even with that as a variant. My thinking is that this watch, the one that I've got and I'm going to be talking about, is the 44mm. Now, Breitling make a SuperOcean 2 for everyone. So there's a 48, a 46, a 44, a 42, and also, and most importantly, a 36mm version. Now, interestingly, that Tudor movement's a bit of a fat boy. It's actually 32 millimeters across compared to the ETA, which is just a tick over 25 millimeters. So it's likely that that bigger B20 or Tudor movement would not have fit in the 36mm case. So my guess is that Breitling took the decision that they just want the same movement in every variant, and so that's why we went with solely the B17 and you don't get the B20 in anything. Okay, as a dive watch, legibility is absolutely key, and this watch pretty much nails it. Doesn't get it perfect, but close enough for government work. Nice big flat dial, super high contrast indices, so everything stands out. Very slightly domed crystal with AR coating top and bottom. Simple stick hands with a minute hand nice and long, making it all the way out to the chapter ring. Unfortunately, the minute hand and the hour hand are essentially identically shaped. So I would have liked something like Seiko does with their, so for example, they often go for the Monster hand, or Rolex does the Mercedes hand, or Tudor does the Snowflake hands. Now, it's not really that I want a Snowflake or a Monster or whatever, but it is nice when the hour hand is kind of differentiated from the minute hand. Unfortunately, in this variant, the minute track markers are red, and they don't really stand out. So overall, I'd say it's excellent. It's not super precise. And look, if I was living or dying by whether I knew my time to the minute at a glance in an emergency, then this is not the watch for you. Given that is probably no one who wants this watch, I think the small compromise to legibility to get the better overall design aesthetic is probably worthwhile. In terms of versatility and who can wear this thing, it's a really odd watch. This is the 44 millimeter, so it's 44 millimeters across. I've measured it as 52 millimeters lug to lug and 14.2 millimeters thick. Now that's a big watch. That's a lot of metal, and yet it seems to be quite wearable. It seems to wear smaller. The lugs sweep down extremely aggressively and hang, and so the strap attachment points are very low, which shape the watch to your wrist quite a bit. Also, the spring bars seem to be quite deep set. So whilst the lug to lug distance is 52 millimeters, it looks like the actual bar to bar length is under 50. So that's probably, combine that with the very aggressively swept down lugs. And this is a surprisingly wearable watch. So it's an easy wear on my 7.5-inch wrist. And I've actually tried it on my daughter's 6.5-inch wrist, and it fits absolutely fine. I've kind of jumped around here a little bit. Just as legibility is absolutely crucial for a diver, obviously robustness is as well. And this watch is about as robust as you can get, which is interesting because the last watch I reviewed was my Edox Hydra Sub, which I thought was the most robust watch until I've got this watch. So look, to start with, the specs are pretty normal. 316L steel, sapphire on the top, stainless steel bezel, which is my favorite material for a bezel. I think it is the Goldilocks. Harder to scratch than aluminium, but it's going to age properly with the rest of the watch, unlike ceramic or sapphire. Now, there are some people on the net who are claiming that there's a vulcanized rubber insert on this bezel. That was the case for previous versions of the SuperOcean. Everything I've read and everything I can feel from poking around, this version is not vulcanized rubber. They have colored the steel in some way. I don't know if it's PVD, I don't know if it's some other process, but from what I understand, it is not a vulcanized rubber insert. Really smart little crown guards. So the crown guards on this are not large, they're not overbearing. Again, comparing it to the Edox I just did, which is massively distorted by the crown guard system. In here, nice, delicate, but really smart little crown guards. They have the effect of protecting that crown very well without being overly obtrusive. Interesting little quirk here too, something Breitling always does, is the bezel isn't simply pressed and snapped on, it's actually attached via a series of screws. You could hit this thing with a hammer and that bezel's not going anywhere. What I would say also is, in terms of water resistance, this watch comes with 1,000 meters of water resistance. Now that is a total luxury. That no one needs 1,000 meters of water resistance, but it is very nice to know. And it's kind of like, it is a luxury. Luxury is anything you have that you don't really need. In terms of band, this particular variant only came on the matching red rubber band as part of the Ironman branding. That band is reasonably stiff and quite workmanlike, but on the other hand, I was looking at a 20-year-old SuperOcean that's available at a vintage seller in Melbourne, and it's got the original band on it, and it's clearly been seen a lot of use, and that band is still kicking goals. So everything I've ever read about these Breitling bands says that they last forever. It appears to be true, and I've had this watch now for a little over 2 weeks, and I've got to say it broke in extremely quickly, and it's now very, very comfortable. The other thing is too, a lot of rubber bands get a bit sticky and difficult to use. This one, again, just slides on and off very easily. It doesn't bind or grip. It's actually a very usable band. 22 millimeters if you do really want to change it out. So it's not your standard 20, but then again, a 20 millimeter band on a 44 watch would probably look a little bit weird. Now the watch is quite heavy, and it is quite large. So putting it on, particularly a double pass NATO, might be problematic. Okay, in terms of looks, this is a thoroughly modern diver. It's clean and simple and bold. First, I should say I place a lot of importance on case and case design, and in that area, Breitling has kind of let me down in that this is a very simple, very workmanlike case. Now, don't get me wrong, it's very pleasant. It's very sensible. It's very professional, tool oriented. All of those are really good features. It just means that when you're looking for something special, there's not really much there. But what is there is well done. There's a sensible choice about satin finishing versus polishing. So all the top surfaces, anything that's likely to take a bit of a hit, seems to have been satin finished. Anything that's a little bit more protected and out of the way has been given a polish. But the polish isn't a super high polish either, which again I think is smart. Going for a more mid sort of polish, I think, is actually a more sensible choice for what is ultimately an incredibly sensible watch. However, I have to admit that there is the occasional featureless slab of steel, which is a personal kind of bugbear that I don't really like. On one side, thankfully it is a relatively thin mid case, and it is broken up on one side by the helium escape valve, and on the other side by the crown, so it's not completely featureless. I should also say that the helium escape valve is fully automatic, so it's not this great warty thing hanging off the side of it like the Seamaster, which is an abomination and really they should get rid of. But also comes with a nice signed crown. Really, I don't know why we even mention that. It should be something we just expect, but clearly some people don't do it. So nice little signed crown here. Okay, so while the case was a bit plain, the dial is simple, but is, I think, absolutely gorgeous. I love this dial. I have loved it since I saw the first pictures of Baselworld. Since that moment, I knew I was going to own one of these watches, and it just so happened that this special edition spoke to me. So I went out, slapped my money down, and bought it quite literally the day I saw it. Huge crisp applied indices in the Arabics and the logo. And the thing is, when I was doing the macro work, you can see how tightly everything is integrated. And I honestly thought it must have been printed or perhaps an embossed logo and indices. I have researched every site I can find. Everyone tells me, that Breitling tells me, and every other reviewer tells me that the indices, the Arabics, the logo are all applied, and there is just no gap at all. It's really quite an amazing little fit they've got there. It's so clean and it's so tight. And so all that fine detail that was kind of missing on the case is here on the dial. Yeah, the hands are simple and they're functional, but they match the indices perfectly and work really well. The chapter ring marking, again, as I said, perhaps with the red markers isn't the most legible, but when you get up close and look in macro, it's just beautifully applied. And the font choices are absolutely perfect. Everything works well for today. 21st century, crisp, clean, modern. I just love this dial. In terms of date integration, easy peasy. There isn't one, so that's pretty easy. Loom is excellent. The indices, hands, Arabics, all got wonderful loom. Stands out. Really nothing much more to say there. On the wrist, it has great presence and it's really beautifully balanced. So it's large on the wrist, but it's not overpowering. And as I said, it fits very comfortably on my 7.5-inch wrist, and I've tried it on my daughter and it works perfectly well on her 6.5-inch wrist. So I think on wrist presence, excellent watch on a variety of wrist sizes. Okay, so it's a 1,000-meter diver, so probably no surprises. It's a solid case bat. It's nice, nothing particularly special, just the great big Ironman on the back. Look, now's as good a time as any to talk about the branding of the Ironman side. This is a watch that when it came out, Breitling said it was a watch designed for Ironman competitors. There are thousands of these around the world. They only made 300 of these watches. They were confident they would sell. In the Australian experience, all 3 sold out the day they became available. I strongly suspect the worldwide supply is gone now. So from that point, it kind of worked. Now, I totally understand that the Ironman branding can come across as a bit naff to most people, and can be a little bit over the top. In Ironman circle, there's a joke, which is, how do you know when someone's an Ironman? You don't need to figure it out, they'll tell you. And that's kind of true, and it is also true of this watch. So for a lot of people, it's probably not going to be what you want, but for the target market, it is perfect. A little bit of news on me and why this particularly appealed to me. I was an Ironman athlete. I have completed, if you count Challenge Roth, I've done 3 full Ironman. Unfortunately, about 2 years ago, something went wrong with my body and I DNF'd my first race and couldn't come back. I couldn't train. It didn't matter what I did. I kept putting on weight and I couldn't recover from any training efforts. It took me a year and a half to find out that I've actually got Hashimoto's disease. It's an autoimmune disease, so that my thyroid doesn't work properly. A couple of months ago, I started exercise more importantly, I started drugs. That's treating it quite well. I'm getting everything back on track now, and I'm committed to try and get myself back to do another Ironman probably in 2020. So for me, this watch acts as something of a totem, a reminder to stay on top of my body and to get back to where I want to be. So for me, branding, which for other people could, as I say, be a bit too much, be a bit naff, actually has quite some significance. And as I said on the podcast I did with the guys from Scottish Watches, it's a whole lot less embarrassing than getting a tattoo when you're 50. In terms of feel, absolutely brilliant. The crown action is fantastic. It's on the big end of middling, so it's a 7mm crown, which is pretty standard. Very easy to grip, nice solid pop. All the positions are nice and clean and positive. Importantly, there's no ghost position or phantom date position. I love that little attention to detail that Breitling's given us of removing that when they remove the date. It's a small touch, but it's a nice one. The bezel, super clean, super crisp, so positive and so locked into each and every detent. There's no play. It's just great. In the hand, this watch is everything you'd expect to be. It's a little bit heavy, but it's nice and smooth. There's nothing harsh, nothing grabs, nothing bites, nothing pinches when you wear it or hold it. It's ideal. On the wrist, it's hefty, but it's certainly comfortable. Those aggressively swept down lugs mean that it wraps around and hugs the wrist quite comfortably. It's not top heavy at all, doesn't feel insecure, it's not wobbly or anything. Also, there's a fair bit of scalloping from the case back up to the mid case on both sides of the case, so you get a little bit of play with your wrist moving backwards and forwards, no pinching or grabbing from the edge. So all in all, really comfortable on the wrist. So we've spoken about the looks and we've also spoken about the feel. Now let's talk about the build, the execution of the design, because there's a lot of watches out there which look okay, look great until you get close and you realize that the builders couldn't quite pull off what the designers wanted. That is absolutely not the case here. The build quality on this watch is amazing. It's not a complex case, but everything is absolutely correct and accounted for. It's clean, it's sharp, it's uniform. The polish is great. I couldn't see any flaws. The brushing is nice and fine and light, giving an almost satinized finish. The dial, very simple. Again, everything's exactly where it should be. The printing is nice and clean and crisp. The indices, as I said before, are so tightly integrated. They almost look like they're part of the dial. Everything's just kind of right. I can't see a single flaw in how they've put this watch together. Now, if you've seen my watch reviews before, you'll know that the next two parts of my watch reviews are a little bit different to everyone else. So here I'm going to talk about authenticity and positional power of the watch. So with authenticity of the watch, what we're talking about here is how true to the history of the brand is this watch, how true to itself is. So is it constrained by that history, or have the designers taken the chance to upgrade and modernize it? And then finally, how honest is the watch? Does it do what it says on the tin? And in this case, this watch is totally authentic in every way, shape and form. Okay, so the first thing is Breitling is no Johnny-come-lately to the world of divers. The first real dive watches were kicked off by Zodiac and with Rolex like on their heels in around 53. Omega came a little bit later in 55, and just 2 years after that, Breitling came out with their first SuperOcean in 57. And they didn't mess around. It came at a time when other dive watches had 60 meters or 100 meters of water resistance. Breitling came straight in with 200 meters on their first effort. And given that that was 62 years ago, I think I'm pretty comfortable in saying that a dive watch is part of Breitling's DNA, even though we think of them more as in the aviation space. Another interesting thing about this watch, though, is that this is an update to the SuperOcean under the new leadership of George Couldnt. Now, George Couldnt has been saying that he wants to bring Breitling back to its more tool roots. And these watches were, as I said, born as tools. Recently, and by recently I mean probably over the last 10 to 15 years, Breitling's kind of became a bit of the circus freaks of the watch world, getting larger and larger and more ornate, more and more blingy. And across the board, George has been bringing this, dialing this back and bringing Breitling back to its tooly roots. And there's all of these very sensible, clean, clear kind of design cues that have come through with the new SuperOcean really double down on that and reinforce that message. So I think this kind of stripped back, more spare and really workmanlike watch, although beautifully built, is very much in the Breitling tradition. Now, having said all of that, this watch is also absolutely true to itself. The designers have kept with the spirit of what a Breitling diver should be, but have not been constrained by the look of past divers. They've allowed themselves to come up with something that is thoroughly modern and matches today. So I think from both of those aspects, they've balanced that really nicely. In terms of transparency, this watch does exactly what it says on the tin. It says it's going to be a super robust, super sensible, incredibly reliable tool for diving. And that is exactly what this is. Okay, so now I talk about the positional power of a watch. So that is, I like to recognize up front that a watch is a positional good, that it says things about you and people will judge the watch and by extension you. And I think it is fair for you to know that Breitling does not have the greatest reputation now. They've got a fair bit of brand recognition, but because of things that brand has done, that recognition is not always positive. They've been making good watches, but their marketing and some of their design choices over the last 10 to 15 years have been terrible. Whether that's their choice of brand ambassadors, where John Travolta may have once made sense, but quite frankly, towards the end, he became something of an embarrassment. Massive overproduction and resulting discounting. Overwrought and weirdly flashy designs like some of the odd chronomats, and then constantly reproducing the same design over and over again with the Navitimer. So you take all of those things and wrap them all up, and Breitling is kind of beloved by some older folk who remember how they once were, but it's not really a popular brand amongst the cool kids, mostly who just know them over what they've done over the last couple of years. So this is changing. As I said earlier, George Couldnt is trying to bring Breitling back to what it was once. I personally think he is succeeding. I personally think that I can sense a shift in how Breitling is seen. But warning, fair warning, that shift is slow, is patchy, and there will be people who will not like this watch, who don't give it a lot of credence, and unfortunately in this community that we're in, that assessment will flow over to you, because that's how watches work. Now, on the other hand, this is a great opportunity for you to get in and be the guy who knows more than those people who are judging you. Because personally, I think this is a great watch and something of a bargain given in the prices that you will actually pay, given those concerns over Breitling that other, frankly, less informed people have. Which brings us to the issue of price and the ease of ownership. Now, MSRP for this, depending on your version with a strap or a bracelet, it's going to cost you about $3,600 US bucks. But you're never ever going to have to pay that. These things are already being advertised as a discount. As I said, depending on how you look at it, that's the upside or the downside of Breitling's lack of positional power at the moment. You'll pick this up for about $2,800 if you're happy to go grey market. They're already turning up on Chronext and Jomashop. That's good, not spectacular value. I'd be lying if I said that was amazing value. I think it's good value though, particularly for the quality of the execution. I find it really, whilst it's not cheap by any means, I find it difficult to think of other watches with this level of execution at this price. In terms of maintenance, this watch has got an absolutely rock solid reputation, very straightforward maintenance in the event that you ever need it, and they're available pretty much everywhere and can be maintained pretty much anywhere. So yeah, like I said, in terms of ease of ownership, this is going to be a pretty easy watch to own. Okay, so let's sum this up. What's the verdict? Are we going to swipe right on this or swipe left? For me, this is a swipe right, not a hard right, but a swipe right, but definitely a swipe to the right. Okay, I think it's got great looks. I think it's got an absolutely fantastic build. I think it's got great performance to outlay ratio. I think that it's not cheap by any means, but what you get for the money is really excellent. But I must admit the Breitling name is problematic. And if you're buying this as a luxury watch to impress other watch enthusiasts, Breitling right now in 2019 is not the brand to be on. Yeah, so that's it. I've got to admit, I love this watch. I paid my money for it, and if I came across as very positive on this, that's how I feel. As I said, I think this is a brilliant watch. I think it's criminally underappreciated. I think it's getting zero coverage out there, and I think it's worth a much harder look. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. Some housekeeping. If you wait a little while, a card's going to come up and it's got my Instagram details and my email address. Please give me a follow on Instagram and you'll get to see what watches I wear on a day-to-day basis, a little bit more of my life as well. If you need to send me a message, you can either DM me on Instagram or send me an email. As I said, I'll give you my email address. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe even if you didn't like this video. I promise I cover a whole bunch of other topics. I try to look at the watch world from a slightly different direction. So one thing I think I can promise is that if you watch my videos, you'll see some things that you won't see and won't hear on other channels. Yeah, that's really about it. Thanks very much, and I'll see you later. Bye.